AP Biology, Chapter 43, the Immune System, Part 3. Part 2 is cut off prematurely. That's why it was only 8 minutes long. Let's review the end of Part 2. Remember that all your cells for your blood come from stem cells, and these stem cells are found in the bone marrow of your larger bones. So the stem cells will differentiate or specialize. The word differentiate means to specialize to become a certain type of cell, to either be erythrocytes, which are red blood cells, platelets, which plug up leaks in your circulatory system, and white blood cells, which we see here. Now we have a variety of white blood cells, and some of these you have to know a little bit more details about, some you don't. For example, the basophils are involved with the inflammatory response for the second line of defense, and that's all you really have to know about basophils. Basophils, inflammatory response, second line of defense. The only other thing that we're going to talk about with basophils is what they produce, something called histamine. Eosinophils are another type of white blood cell, and they are able to fight off parasites, especially multicellular parasites like worms. Now, they're not very effective at that. We can get worm infections and they don't go away. However, this is the type of white blood cell that will attack those parasites. And that's all you have to know about eosinophils. And you can go and write that down. Eosinophils fight parasites, and that's it. Now, for the second line of defense, remember that's non-specific. It'll go after any invaders. We have two main types of white blood cells, and they're called the monocytes, which become macrophages, and neutrophils. In the third line of defense, we have B and T cells, and these are both called lymphocytes. They're only going to be involved with a specific type of antigen on an invader. So they are the third line of defense that we'll talk about later. All right, second line of defense. We have two types of white blood cells, or leukocytes. Leuko means white. Neutrophils and macrophages. Neutrophils neutralize invaders. That's one way to help you remember it. And they're attracted by chemical signals. That's called positive chemotaxis, or movement toward a chemical signal. They enter the infected tissue, they engulf and ingest the microbes, and once they detect those chemicals, they look like they're actually angry, and they're actually called angry white blood cells at that point. And basically what they'll do is move a little faster and start being a little more active, and they'll start gobbling up invaders by engulfing them and then digesting them. Macrophages literally means big eater, macrophage, and these are longer lived. And these are the only white blood cells that are involved with two lines of defense. They're involved with the second line of defense, so they'll go after any invader inside your body, but they're also going to help with the specific line too later. You can kind of remember this is one big eater. This is one macrophage, and they eat the invaders in you. Phagocytes, they act kind of like amoebas. Amoebas make these little pseudopods, or little extensions of their cytoplasm, and then they engulf bacteria or anything else in your body that's recognized as foreign, like yeast, which is a eukaryote fungus. And once they engulf it, the lysosomes inside will fuse with the vacuoles containing the bacteria or whatever else is inside you. Once those enzymes inside the lysosome are released, they're hydrolytic enzymes, so they're going to break down whatever's inside, and then the broken down bacterial remains are released from the white blood cell. And this is how the white blood cells do their role in defending you: engulf and digest. Remember that macrophages are longer lived. They are a big eater. They come from monocytes. Macrophages start off their existence as a monocyte and become a macrophage. That's the one way you can remember it, by the way. When you think this is one big eater, the prefix one is mono. So monocyte, one big eater. Monocytes become macrophages. Neutrophils are shorter lived, and they will act fierce or angry when they see or detect chemical signals and start moving toward it. Remember, both, that's compare, will engulf invaders and digest them with lysosomes using hydrolytic enzymes. All right. Now, the lymphatic system is a secondary set of tubes in addition to your circulatory system, which consists of arteries, veins, and capillaries. Now, the heart is not actually pushing on these lymphatic vessels. Your heart is actively pushing the blood through your veins and arteries. So let's review the circulatory system very quickly. You should know that the arteries have the most pressure on them. And why? The blood's coming right off the heart, so they have the thickest walls. The next slowest blood is moving through your veins. Think of it as like streams of capillaries kind of combining together. And in a stream, when all those little streams, representing capillaries, combine together, the water starts to move faster, if you're talking about it like a river analogy. When all the capillary beds start to combine together to become veins, take blood back to the heart, the blood speeds up a little bit, but it's still not as much pressure or push as what's coming off the heart. The capillaries are where the blood's moving the slowest, and there's the least amount of pressure just because of all the branching going on. Now, in the lymphatic system, there's no push from the heart at all. In fact, the only way that we move the lymph around, which is just interstitial fluid that we're returning back to our circulatory system, is by the contraction of muscles. And if you remember, the lymph vessels as well as veins have one-way valves. So every time you flex your muscles, you push the lymph a little bit forward, and it prevents backflow by the one-way valves. So that's how you move fluid in your lymph system. Muscle contraction, pushing fluid forward, interstitial fluid, the fluid that surrounds your cells, being returned back to your circulatory system by the flexing of muscles and one-way valves. Now, the other thing you have to know about the lymphatic system is that there's something called lymph nodes. You have them under your armpits, on the inside of your groin, and on the side of your neck is where you have a lot of them. So think of them as like little police stations. This is where we have masses of lymphocytes and macrophages. When you are infected, what happens is these white blood cells start to multiply and collect in the lymph nodes, and they start to swell. So when the doctor feels your neck, or if your arms feel swollen underneath or on the inside of your groin, you probably have an infection of some kind because your white blood cells are collecting in these lymph nodes. So that's the second thing you have to know about the lymphatic system. It is an area of transport and collection of white blood cells. It's involved with the immune system, and it returns interstitial fluid back to your circulatory system. All right, inflammatory response. Now, your first line of defense is your skin, but what if that skin is breached? We're still talking about the second line of defense now, and what the second line, or the nonspecific patrol, is going to do about that breached first line of defense. Let's say you have a pin with a bunch of bacteria on the head. You can fit like 100 bacteria on the tip of a pin, or more than 100 bacteria on the tip of a pin. They are very, very tiny. And if you were to prick yourself, the bacteria are now inside your body. Now, the first thing that will happen is macrophages will recognize this and start gobbling up some of the invaders. But you also have another type of white blood cell called the basophil. These basophils release something called histamine. Now, maybe you've heard of an antihistamine like Benadryl. Well, histamine is a chemical released by basophils to attract more white blood cells to a point of invasion. So basophils will release histamine. Histamine will attract more red blood cells or white blood cells. Now, the other thing that histamine will do, as well as the inflammatory response in general will do, is make the blood vessels more leaky. Now, you might be asking yourself, well, why is that good? Well, if the blood vessels, the capillaries near the site of infection, become more leaky, now the fluid can more easily leave the capillaries, and even the white blood cells now can squeeze through the leaky blood vessels and start to gobble up the invaders. So think of the adaptive value. You prick yourself with a pin, you get bacteria in your body, you have some macrophages in that area just gobbling up invaders, nonspecific patrol. Remember, they start off as monocytes. But you also have basophils in your body that release histamine that will make the blood vessels leaky to allow more white blood cells to arrive at that scene and gobble up invaders. And it will also attract more white blood cells, phagocytic cells. Remember, phagocytic means cells that eat. That's a general name for monocytes, macrophages, and neutrophils. So if you prick yourself, sometimes you feel that swelling and that redness. That swelling and redness is not a bad thing. That's actually what's happening to help you fight off that infection. Sometimes you'll feel heat at the site of infection. The re-raising of the body's temperature will also be a way to control bacteria. Bacteria can't survive hot temperatures very well. So when your body resets its thermostat for that area, then it helps control and kill off bacteria, or it helps the white blood cells do their job better. All right, so explain the inflammatory response. Pause at this time. Step 1, bacteria breach the first line of defense. Step 2, macrophages start eating some of the invaders. Step 3, basophils release histamine to attract the white blood cells to the area of infection, as well as to make the blood vessels in the area leaky so more blood cells can leave. Step 4, more white blood cells come to this area, gobble up invaders. Temperature goes up in the area, swelling occurs, and all those things are in aid of fighting off the infection. One thing I should mention is that when you have a generalized histamine reaction, sometimes you release histamine on accident as a result of allergies and other autoimmune diseases. So when that happens, if you take an antihistamine, it reverses the effects, and that's why you do that. Hives and some itchiness as a result of allergies can be negated with antihistamines. All right, fever, and when the entire body is under attack, sometimes the whole body's thermostat gets reset in order to help fight off those bacteria. However, if even though the higher temperature is good, so a little bit of fever helps you fight off the infection. However, if the fever gets too high, then if it gets above like 160 degrees Fahrenheit, some of the proteins start denaturing in your body. Proteins carry out life processes. That could be a life-threatening situation. So a fever that's out of control needs to be controlled by cooling the person down. However, a little bit of fever is not bad for the person. It's actually doing all three of these things to help fight the infection and repair the damage. You can read this if you'd like. All right, so that's the first and second line of defense. If at this time you want to pause and review the first and second line, you might want to make sure that you understand those two lines. The third line of defense is a little bit more complicated, and we're going to spend a little more time on it. Now, the two main cells that are involved that you should know are B cells and T cells, or B lymphocytes and T lymphocytes. These are very specific to one type of invader. You also have another type of protein called antibodies, and antibodies are defense proteins that we're going to talk about in a few minutes as well. The third line of defense responds to specific toxins, like if you're bitten by like a snake, microorganisms. We have viruses and bacteria that like to eat us, abnormal body cells like cancer cells, and antigens. Now, the definition of an antigen is anything that elicits an immune response, so it's a fairly general term. However, specifically, an antigen refers to the glycoproteins or sugar protein chains on the outside of the cell that's used for cell-cell recognition. If it's an antigen that's foreign to your body, it's recognized by the third line of defense and it will be attacked. All right, lymphocytes develop from pluripotent. Pluripotent just means it could become anything. It can become many things. Pluri means more than one. Potent means it has the potential to become something else. Stem cells are the starting point for cells before they become differentiated. B cells and T cells both start off in the bone marrow. However, the B cells mature also in the bone marrow, and B cells will be responsible for the humoral response system or the fluid response system, and they're going to be the ones making antibodies. You should write that down. B cells make antibodies, part of the humoral response system that we'll talk more about later, mature in the bone marrow. And you can remember that B, bone marrow, B cells. All right, T cells also start off in the bone marrow, but they mature in something called the thymus. And the thymus is located in the front of your body, near the lower part of your neck. So if you feel like not your trachea, but lower than that is your thymus. Antigens, or cell markers, will determine what cells are yours and what cells are invaders. Even if it's a tissue transplant, like let's say you're getting an organ from someone else, those antigens on the outside of their cells might be so different from yours that you might reject those tissues, and you might have to suppress your immune system if you're getting a transplant. All right. What are the two types of lymphocytes, and where do they mature? Now we're going to go into some more details about the Bs and T cells. B cells involved with the humoral response, or they are involved with mainly attacking things floating freely in your blood and in the lymph vessels. So any invaders that are just kind of floating around in your blood are going to be attacked by B cells. They're going to be the ones that are going to recognize that. Now the B cells don't actually attack things directly, but we'll talk about how they do their work coming up. You have millions of different types of B cells, and each produces different antibodies. So pretty much anything in nature that produces an antigen or something that your body can recognize as foreign, you have a B cell for, and you make this when you're very, very young. B cells that would recognize your own body as foreign are not selected for in your earliest development years, so you don't make B cells to attack your own cells. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here. Now, there's two types of B cells, and you have to know what each one of these B cells do. Plasma cells is a type of B cell that produces antibodies, and these release these fairly soon. Memory cells will be involved with long-term immunity, so that if you get the same invader, like let's say a year or 10 years from now, the memory cells will start to kick in, and this type of B cell will make plasma cells to release antibodies to fight the invader when it comes back. Memory cells are especially important for vaccines that we'll be talking about coming up soon. B cells are involved with the humoral response. That means it's invaders floating in the fluid. The two types of clones, or identical copies that come from B cells, are plasma cells and memory cells. Plasma cells make antibodies. Memory cells will be in your body and be prepared to recognize an invader if it comes back. All right, antigens. Let's write this down. Antigens are foreign proteins that elicit a specific response by lymphocytes, and they're very specific to whatever they're coming from. Viruses, bacteria, fungi, protozoan, parasitic worms, toxins, a lot of non-pathogens like pollen and transplanted tissue also have proteins, glycoproteins on the outside of the cells that are recognized as foreign. All those glycoproteins are called antigens. B and T cells respond to different antigen mechanisms. B cells recognize intact antigens, or antigens that are not broken down. T cells recognize even the fragments of antigens. We'll talk about what that means later. All these invaders have antigens that your body can respond to. Pollen doesn't really cause any damage. It's like a misresponse of your immune system. All right, antibodies. This is the general structure here. It looks kind of like a little Y for the basic type of antibody. There's a couple different classes of antibodies that you don't have to know. Proteins that bind to a specific antigen. So that's what an antibody does. It binds to a specific antigen. If it's an antibody that only works on, let's say, antigens on the outside of E. coli, it won't bind to anything else. So they're very specific. This is the third line of defense. That's what that means. Antibodies match the molecular shape of antigens. Kind of think of it as a lock and key. The immune system has antibodies to respond to millions of different antigens that could invade you. And it basically tags a particle or an antigen as being foreign. All right, so how do antibodies work? Well, there's a couple ways, and you should be familiar with each one of these ways. The first way that antibodies work, these defense proteins produced by B cells, plasma cells, a type of B cell, is neutralization. If you block all the binding sites on a virus using antibodies, they can't bind to your cells, and then they can't take over the cell. Same with the bacteria. If you block all the binding sites on a bacteria, they won't be able to physically attach to your cells and get inside. The next way antibodies work is called agglutination, or basically clumping. That's a fancy word for clumping. So why would that be useful? Well, here we have a different type of antibody. It has 5 prongs on it. This is something called IgM. And here's bacteria all clumped up. And here's a white blood cell. Now, this is the real value of antibodies. Think about eating peas. Is it easier to eat a pea individually, or is it easier to use a spoon to eat a pea? Of course, the answer, or peas. The answer, of course, is to use a spoon. This is kind of making the immune system more efficient. Instead of the macrophages gobbling up each individual invaders, what ends up happening with agglutination is the antibodies clump up, like using a spoon with peas, all these bacteria. And then when a white blood cell recognizes it chemically, it just engulfs the whole mass. And when it does that, it makes the role of the macrophages much more valuable because they're grabbing a whole bunch of bacteria at the same time. So this is the main way antibodies do their thing. Clumping makes it easier for macrophages to gobble up the invaders. Remember, macrophages were involved with the second line of defense too. Now, another way antibodies work is called precipitation. So imagine all these antigens being connected together by a bunch of antibodies. These antibodies and antigen complex will become very dense and separate from the solution and separate out from the rest of the fluid of your blood, and that's one way to neutralize invaders. The last method is kind of interesting. It's called complement. And you don't have to know details about the non-complement proteins, but what I do want you to know is the antibodies trigger or initiate the complement reaction. So the first thing that happens is an antibody binds to a foreign cell, and then complement proteins form a circle. And then once the circle is formed, it puts a hole in the cell membrane, and the cell dies. So antibodies trigger complement that puts holes in the cells and kills the cells. Now you might be thinking that'd be a better way of killing cells, but it's actually this, agglutination, and assisting the macrophages that is more useful role for antibodies. All right, let's go ahead and review the 4 ways that antibodies help you fight infection in the third line of defense. This ends part 3 of your notes on Chapter 43, the immune system.